have any council members that are present today. If you introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. This is Malcolm Graham, chairman of the Great Neighborhoods Committee, present and accounted for.
Good morning, Malcolm. Now, we'll move over to our committee members.
Sure, I'll kick us off. Mark Etheridge with Ascent Housing, co-chair of this wonderful committee.
Good morning, everyone. Kim Graham with the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, and I also co-chair this committee with Mark.
Stephanie Hand, representing the United Methodist Church. Just a privilege to serve alongside of these great people.
And I will, anyone else from the committee members? If not, we will move over to our Evelyn staff.
Good morning. Fulton Meacham, President and CEO of Enlivian. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Kimberly Cole in Livian.
Good morning. And then we'll go down to our city staff.
Sean Heath, City Manager's Office.
Pamela Weidman, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Rebecca Hefner, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Excellent. Good to have all of you here today. We'll turn it over to our chair and our co-chair to review our
Hey,
agenda.
Jason, I want to go back to Phil is on the line now.
Okay.
Oh, hi. Phil Tegler from the Poverty and Race Research Action Council in DC.
Good morning, Phil. And did we miss anyone else that may have joined after we went around for our introduction? If not, we will kick it over to our chair and our co-chair.
Thank
Sure.
you, Mark. Do you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Jason. And is anyone else having connection issues, or is it just? Kim, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but I am getting this little spinning circle thing on my computer.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Okay, yeah, my all the videos are going in and out, and I'm having really choppy audio. I'm gonna move around and see if I can get something to work a little bit better. Can everyone see and hear me okay?
We can hear you. The video's out, but we can't hear you. There you go. I think we may have lost Mark.
Okay. I'm not sure. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm at home and it's always questionable. And so,
Hey, Kim.
Our agenda.
Kim, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Harold, our technology asked me to just say that if you're not speaking, maybe if you turn off your cameras, maybe that might help as we work through some of this. We'll try that. Thank you. Sorry, Kim.
No, you're fine. Thank you, Pam. So the majority of our agenda today, and I'm going to hold off in going into it in any depth until Mark gets back on, but we have the proposed recommendations that have been shared with the committee members, and we will be essentially going through a discussion of those recommendations. We have at least one that we need to talk through in terms of an explanation on the recommendation and kind of how we see it moving forward. But I'm just going to pause. It looks like Mark is able to jump back on with us.
Yeah, the extent of my technical knowledge when something's not working is to turn it off and turn it back on. So hopefully this is better. Kim, it sounds like we're about to get into our recommendations. Is that right? Great.
That's exactly what I teed up. So your timing is perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I I can share, or is there any way for us to pull up the recommendations, the Word document that we distributed yesterday evening?
Yeah, Mark, we can pull it up. Just give us just a few moments.
Okay, thank you. So while you're doing that, I'll do a little bit of talking. So, coming out of the work session in November, this committee came away with 3 recommendations that covered everything from policy to funding to some new innovative ideas that we thought would solve a couple of issues here on this source of income topic. The first is ensuring that our success rate for folks with vouchers or rental subsidies looking for housing increases. And because of some of the minutia that's happening in the community with the investments being made by the city and kind of the private partnerships that have been created over the last several years, we think that, projects with units with specific set-asides, or at least with kind of active initiatives to source 30% AMI households with rentals and rental subsidies and vouchers is going to increase, and that supply issue is going to be really, in a much better position over the several years as those projects come online than we've been in historically. The one thing we think needs extra effort, and I think that these recommendations do a great job helping us fulfill, is the question of location. And so while we have not only a supply-demand imbalance right now, and the success rate is not 100%, specifically for the Housing Choice Voucher Program and finding families seeking housing when they have a voucher. We also know that if you look at the map of where Housing Choice Vouchers are and where some other rental subsidy programs are in Charlotte today, they're not often enough in moderate and high opportunity areas. And so what I really applaud about the recommendations that we've tried to set forth from our working session that we'll talk about today really are geared towards increasing the number of voucher and rental subsidy holders in moderate high opportunity areas. And so once the document is pulled up, we can talk about those one by one. I think the first 2 are going to be really almost verbatim what we had talked about coming out of the working session in November. The third one we should spend a good amount of our time on, because while the proposal we had, I thought, was an innovative one, it does run up against some legal obstacles that we've come across after reviewing with some of the city's attorneys. And so we can talk about that and talk about some pathways to make modifications whereby we might be able to accomplish similar objectives to what that recommendation wanted to accomplish in light of the legal barriers that exist.
Mark, team is still working, trying to get that up. Maybe you can go ahead and just start talking through the recommendations.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so the first recommendation, number 1, is a policy recommendation. And it's oriented towards not only the city of Charlotte, but also to Mecklenburg County. And the recommendation is that both the city and the county should include source of income protections for any for-rent residential project, including both affordable housing and market rate developments where public financial support of any kind is provided. And so I think the important distinction for us and that our committee came with is that not only should it be affordable housing projects that include these source of income protections, but any for-rent residential project, including market rate projects, which oftentimes may be supported by instruments that happen outside of housing and neighborhood services. They're happen in vehicles like TIGs that come from the economic development side. And so we think, every time that the city or the county supports a project financially that includes for-rent residential housing, those source of income protections should be in place. And the hope there is not only to create that sort of equity in publicly supported projects for both the city and the county, but also just knowing historically that the projects that receive financial support, especially in vehicles outside of Housing Trust Fund and investments tailored outside of housing, the LIHTC investments, are often in those moderate and high opportunity areas. So this could go a long way in helping to create opportunities for rental subsidy and voucher holders to live in those moderate and high opportunity areas in our community. does anyone have any comments about the way that the recommendation was written, or about how we got to this recommendation through our working session last month?
I guess I did have one question. It's Phil Tegler. Mark, is the intent to the recommendation says this would impose source of income discrimination protections on any project receiving city support of any kind, which I think that makes a lot of sense. The goal says create a new policy requiring mandatory acceptance of housing choice vouchers. I was just wondering if there's a market rate project that has rents that are higher than the highest payment standard that Livian can offer, does this policy require that development to provide some rents that are within the payment standard, or would those projects not be subject to the requirement?
It's a good question, Philip, and not something that I think we got really into substantive discussion on last month. And I think a little bit kind of this pertains to enforcement and how these policies are enacted and then followed up and governed. But in my mind, and honestly, I may ask either other committee members or especially the team from Livian, I think the goal of our work here is that anyone who can show up to a property and afford to pay the rent, whether it be if they're totally unsubsidized or whether it be through the help of a voucher or rental subsidy, should be able to qualify for that housing, assuming all other criteria checks the box. And so I think if you look at it in that context, we're typically expecting that landlords who receive public support and have this source of income language written into those supports should accept housing choice voucher recipients and other rental subsidy holders, so long as the rent that that voucher or rental subsidy is paying meets the asking rent that they would ask of any other resident. And I think that's the way, the context of how I would come out on that question, but I'm certainly open to opinions from the rest of the committee.
Thanks.
No, Mark, I think you've hit it on the head. I think the whole context here was ensuring that families with housing vouchers or other alternate sources of legal income will be treated just like anybody else, right? I think we're not asking for any additional privileges. It's basically saying, hey, I'm just like you. I have income. I want you to treat me the same way that you treat anyone else that comes to your door asking for the opportunity to live in your property. So I think you've hit it on the head here. There's no question that we would love to see publicly funded projects be asked to create a number of affordable housing units in them. But this is kind of addition to that, right? That would be an addition to this. It's not this specifically, but I think this particular goal and recommendation is exactly what we're looking for. And I just want to, again, thank the entire committee for their hard work.
Hey, Mark,
Thank you.
This is Pam, and I just want to just kind of echo what your response to Philip and Fulton's comments, and just do that in a way to remind people that, or just to inform. And I think it's a good news story is that as recent as maybe, and Mr. Graham will correct me if I'm wrong, 2 or 3 weeks ago, with the innovation TIG with Atrium and the property that they're going to redevelop in the Innovation District, they've committed to over 400 affordable housing units that will occur in that property. So that's an area of high opportunity to the extent that they have LIHTC funding or so that's going to be really helpful there. And I guess the bigger point is that, developers, when they are coming for TIGs, they are coming with the affordable housing piece, which is good news, and they are understanding and trying to help address the issue that you guys have worked so hard on for the past several months. I just wanted to share that information.
Thank you, Ms. Wyman. And I would say I also believe that number one and number two are complementary to a certain extent, because I think you have to lay the groundwork that this is an expectation we have for both of our local government bodies as the right thing to do anytime they support a deal. In terms of tactically ensuring that it is practical for landlords to accept housing choice voucher recipients and other rental subsidy recipients, number two speaks to that, because one of the items in number two, and this may be a segue, but we may spend more time talking on one, is this whole idea of equipping a third-party organization to help bridge the gap between wherever a payment standard might fall short and some of the other bells and whistles around the process involved with leasing to housing choice voucher or other rental subsidy recipients. And so in my mind, you know, even if a project receives a TIG and is in a high opportunity area where the market rents may exceed the payment standard, in even the best case that might be provided by a rental subsidy or voucher, number two puts funding into the community to allow us to stretch with either supplemental rent payments or interim rent payments or additional security deposit protections or other things to try to, you know, close that gap to make sure that we're covering as wide of a swath in the highest opportunity area as possible. And so I think what I like about the document we've proposed is not only do we lay the groundwork for what we think an expectation is for our public bodies, but we've also taken some tactical initiatives to try to make sure that not only from a principal perspective we can do it, then from a tactical perspective we can meet the market where it is or where it might be in the future. And so I think hopefully 1 and 2 may work complementary in a scenario like what Philip described.
Are we going to advance the slide to number 2? I don't have the benefit of having that in front of me. Thank you.
No problem. So that was the segue to number 2. Look at that. So recommendation number 2 says that the City of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and philanthropic sectors should provide new or increased funding to increase capacity of existing local organizations to create greater landlord participation in the housing choice voucher and other rental subsidy programs in areas of moderate to high opportunity. And so I think what you are seeing in this recommendation is some of the insights we took away from looking not only to other rental subsidy providers locally, but also to some examples around the country of where funding to a third-party intermediary has helped kind of bridge the gap between landlords and rental subsidy providers like Enlivian or other organizations. The recommendation goes on to say that the Ad-Hoc Committee believes that the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County should participate in providing this funding, but also recognizes that the private and philanthropic sector can also play a role, recognizing that providing housing and economic mobility and opportunities is a social responsibility. And so the bullet points listed in this recommendation give some broad outline of how this funding may be used and what the actions of this existing organization that gets bolstered would be expected to do. And one is to recruit new landlords in moderate to high opportunity areas to accept vouchers and rental subsidies. 2, to act as a landlord for the tenant as a leaseholder for the property through master leases by working hand in hand with Enlivian. So this is a concept borrowed directly from NestQuest, who spoke to us a couple months ago, where they actually would go master lease units from a landlord with the sole purpose of then turning and subleasing those units to housing choice voucher, essentially, tenant-based Section 8 voucher recipients in their locality. It would also serve as a first point of contact for landlords and property managers for any issues that arise during a voucher or rental subsidy holder's occupancy. And also, we think not only do we need to fund payroll to kind of amplify that housing navigation and landlord recruitment effort, but also if you're going to master lease units and you're going to try to create some incentives to maybe bridge to, the nicest projects in the best neighborhoods that might exceed payment standards, or to help close the gap between the typical move-in process of a conventional tenant and the move-in process of a tenant with a voucher that requires that additional inspection. We may want financial tools for them to be able to create bridge rent payments to cover the gap in the inspection process. We may want additional monies for supplemental rent to exceed what a Livian might pay in their payment standard to what the market rent is at that property. We may want funding for additional security deposit protections, which I think we've heard some anecdotes about across the country, but I think could be really useful to give landlords not only something that gets them to equilibrium with the market, but something above and beyond what the market can provide that could really offer a true incentive for landlords to participate in this program. And so the committee proposes that funding would go towards payroll costs as well as investments in these sort of tools to make that work. And the goal of this is something that we did not talk about at length in our working committee. And what's prescribed here is the goal would be to add 75 housing choice voucher or other rental subsidy recipients in moderate and high opportunity areas over the first 2 years. And the basis for that goal is a little bit about taking an example from what Livian's been able to accomplish through their 2020 program enhancements, which I believe the last report we got had gotten 39 housing choice voucher recipients into high opportunity areas through those enhancements. We think this is an amplification of what Livian has done and is able to do as a move to work designated authority. And with that, we think we should be able to take that similar sort of trajectory of, roughly 35 to 40 housing choice voucher recipients per year and getting them into those moderate and high opportunity areas. And like a lot of the recommendations that we've written in this document, the idea would be that we would, once this, 18 or 24 month period has gone by and we've looked at the outcomes versus our prescribed goals, we revisit these recommendations or these initiatives to see what might need to be tweaked to better amplify efforts. So that was a lot of words from me, and there's a lot of meat in this particular recommendation. So I'd welcome any input or discussion from the committee.
Mark, I had a question. It's Kim Cole. As relates to the goal for adding 75 housing choice voucher or rental subsidy recipients. So that goal is not just the housing choice voucher program as administered by Livian, but also other rental subsidy programs would feed into that 75?
That's correct.
Hi, this is Phil again. I think I might have a friendly amendment. When you're doing this kind of housing mobility initiative and you're adding in moderate opportunity areas, there's often the risk of kind of reconcentration. You see that. Those are the easiest places sometimes to place people. So if we could say, moderate to high opportunity areas that don't already have significant numbers of housing choice vouchers already, just to avoid that risk of like clustering, because that's going to be, if that's the performance goal of the nonprofit, they're going to just pile it on in the places where it's easiest to find housing for folks. So if that can be kind of amended in there, that would be helpful. Just to kind of, so a good mobility program keeps an eye on, where vouchers are going over time to kind of prevent that reconcentration problem in the moderate opportunity areas.
Phil, this is Kim Graham. Can I ask a question of you? So is it your contention that this recommendation might have the unintended consequence or the unintended result of over-concentrating housing choice voucher participants in higher opportunity areas?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, my concern, just based on past experience, is when you start adding in those moderate opportunity areas, which are, sort of moderate poverty areas sometimes also, you can risk, putting sort of quote unquote too many. I mean, this is a choice program, obviously, but, you can risk kind of steering a lot of voucher families to those moderate opportunity areas. So I'm just saying, putting in something to avoid, over concentration of vouchers in any one neighborhood would just kind of flag that point, so that the whatever program is funded is keeping an eye on that. I'm concerned about the moderate opportunity places. I'm not concerned about the high opportunity neighborhoods at all.
And so is it your thought that in terms of operationalizing this, that there's some tracking mechanism to ensure that, if an area has a certain, I'd say, AMI level, that we monitor that so it doesn't slip, and that we don't have a too high percentage of people with housing choice vouchers being placed somewhere where it's trending down in terms of the income levels?
Yeah, just if there's to keep an eye on that issue. And if a neighborhood is getting a large number of, if you're having significant success in one particular neighborhood, maybe you deprioritize that and kind of focus on other neighborhoods, when you're showing families opportunities. It's a simple concept, really, but it's just when I see that phrase, moderate opportunity neighborhoods, I remember experiences in other places, and just keeping an eye on that, and just being aware of the existing concentration of voucher families in certain moderate opportunity neighborhoods. And Livian knows exactly what, where their families are distributed, and they can assist in kind of flagging that. If there are, I don't know the geography in Charlotte as well as I should, but if there are moderate opportunity neighborhoods that already have a lot of voucher families, I'm just saying, let's not prioritize those.
Well, I think, Bill, you raised an excellent point. Not surprising. And there's a lot to unpack in it. And I think if I had to get down to the essence of what I think this recommendation is about, this recommendation is about creating opportunities that the market is not giving us. And so I think your point about where we're able to place housing choice voucher and other rental subsidy recipients in the market today are not necessarily areas we need to prioritize for this recommendation, because the point of asking the city and the county and the philanthropic sector for money to help is to create outcomes that otherwise would not have happened. And that means getting folks into neighborhoods that they're not currently getting into because of market barriers or stigmas or myths or whatever it may be. And so I think, I am pro keeping, you could make a debate about whether you concentrate this to just high opportunity areas. And I would probably fall on the fence of, I think it should still be moderate and high, with an asterisk on the moderate, where we need to look at historical patterns of where rental subsidy holders are to make sure that this impact is actually moving the market, not just fortifying what market conditions currently are. And I think we also have to lay on that not all moderate opportunity areas are created equal. And so what is the definition of moderate, and how do we want to put boundaries on it? You could look at the Raj Chetty Opportunity Atlas, and you could see what outcomes are in those moderate incomes and say, okay, you can rank moderate opportunity areas to see where low-income families have more success than others. NestQuest bases all of their work based on schools. We could look similarly at our public education and try to make some criteria. So, I think there needs to be more specificity and intentionality about how you capture moderate. But if it was up to me, I would keep moderate in there, but give ourselves time between now and the final report, or even just instructions for whoever take this final report and puts it into action, that we want to be really sensitive to how we use this funding, how we allocate these resources, and make sure it achieves the outcomes that, like I said, give us an outcome that's different than what the market is currently providing.
I would also just add that Phil raises a very valid and fair point. In the spirit of what we're trying to do, I want to make sure that we don't end up tripping over ourselves and not housing a family because of some trigger mechanism that we put in to ensure that we're not over concentrating housing choice vouchers in an area that could tip one way or the other, while we're still trying to create opportunities for success and upward mobility for families in higher opportunity areas. And what that looks like will probably be thought out by some city staff person working with our friends at Livian. But this could be nuanced, but we could also get ourselves in trouble and end up, not doing the highest good that we want to do.
That's a really good point. Every housing choice voucher family has the right to live anywhere in the city of Charlotte or anywhere else in the country they want to live. That's 100%. This is just about what a particular nonprofit program is prioritizing in terms of its own, helping families. And I agree with Mark that, as long as you're keeping an eye on those issues, it makes sense to broaden the tent a little bit.
Right. And I agree with both what Mark, Kim, and Phil is saying. I think once we operationalize this, as Phil said, our residents will have an opportunity to kind of move anywhere they would like to move in the city. But as we create this defined opportunity mapping, then we would be evaluating those areas that might be moderate, that have, a higher concentration of HCV vouchers, and then maybe just not count those in our goal at some point if we get into the 75. So I definitely see keeping moderate in there because there are some moderate areas that have some very great impacts on low-income families. But just how we operationalize it and keeping our goal as a component of it, I think that's the best way to handle that. So I appreciate the comment, Phil. Can I say one more thing, though? Because this is more than just the housing choice voucher, we do a pretty good job of tracking information. I would say that as we continue to operationalize this too, if there are other organizations that are getting public funding for this type of activity, some type of rental subsidy, it should probably require for them to kind of track this information as well, and maybe put that in some of their goals in order to assist us in making sure that we're getting to this 75.
I think that's a good comment. Thank you, Fulton. Pam, do you or any other staff members want to make a comment on this recommendation?
No, Mark. I mean, I think what the last discussion around let's not penalize moderate was going to be my comment, so we're in good shape.
And it just occurred to me through some help of a bird in my ear. When we say moderate to high, we also mean very high. So I think high is the ceiling for me, but I realize that in Livian's vernacular, very high exists. And I think that we're certainly trying to get from moderate to the best we can do through this program. The idea is this is really trying to get, this addresses this geography question, this location question that we're struggling with about trying to change the map of where HCVs and other rental subsidies exist. So thank you to the bird in my ear. All right, you guys ready for the fun one? So we will go down to recommendation number 3. All right, so in our working session in November, we thought that there should be an incentive for developers to participate with the Housing Choice Voucher Program or other rental subsidies that would create a carrot where we can also add more Housing Choice Voucher and rental subsidy units in moderate to very high opportunity areas in new projects where we know that typically, historically, we're saying we're probably not getting vouchers in those units. The idea of the working session created was that if a developer building a new project, 200 units or more, set aside at least 5% of their units for 30% AMI and below households with rental subsidy or voucher for a minimum of 15 years, they could get 25% off their city-owed annual property taxes for that 15-year period. It would show up in the form of a reimbursement. The reimbursement would not be applicable until that landlord had leased every unit that they pledged to lease to a voucher holder. And this would kind of help change, this whole conversation about the map, like we've been talking about in recommendation number 2. Upon the analysis of the city's legal team, we have realized that there are some pretty specific criteria that are required when public investments go into housing projects for low and moderate income folks. And the statute that really informs how the city makes investments in housing projects to serve low and moderate income households dates back to like 1936. And so I had a really fun conversation yesterday, getting a half-hour education about how a statutory authority that created housing authorities, like in Livian, is also used to equip the city to make affordable housing investments, and how this statutory, the statute from 1936 and its amendments over the years really guides a lot of things. And the long story short is any time that the city makes an investment of dollars into a residential project for the purpose of serving low and moderate income households, it has to at least have the project at least serve 20% of its units to 60% AMI households and below. And so the concept that we created, where the project was otherwise market rate, that had at least a 5% set aside to voucher holders, would have to be quadrupled to meet that test. And I think there's a couple realities that get in the way of wanting to do that. The first is economics. Obviously, when you get 25% off your city taxes, which are typically only around 40% of your total property taxes, the numbers make sense to a developer to give 5% of their units, even if the payment standard is slightly below where their market rents might be. However, if you had to do that for 20% of the property, you'd either need a much larger property tax reimbursement, or you'd have to be creative on other ways to supplement that. The other practical reality is, I do not believe that market rate developers would do 20% set asides in their projects for this and this alone, even if the economics were positive to them. I think when market rate developers build market rate projects, that's what they are expecting, that's what they're financing, that's what their intention is. And I think there's probably an upward boundary of around 5% of what we think would be practical for someone to want to incorporate into their projects, even in a positive economic scenario. And so with that in mind, assuming that the city is bound by this statutory limitation, which I believe to be correct, I think we have a couple different pathways to try to think through how we might need to modify this recommendation. And before I discuss those pathways, I want to open up the floor to anyone who has questions about what this statute does and how this requirement works, and make sure they understand why we may not be able to do what we sought out to do through this recommendation.
Mark, I'll just say, just like you, we were talking about it yesterday, so it was, brand new, and I think we should continue to look at it. But it does look like, at least that is what the city attorney's opinion is on the issue. And I would agree with you too. I think 20% is just probably not tenable to market to the market sector property owners. And I think we should probably just go through a couple of the ideas that we think could have this construct, but maybe operationalized a little differently. So I'll be open to some of those suggestions. I think I have a couple myself.
Okay. Anyone else?
So, Mark, this is Pam. I think, let's go through them, but I hope the committee understands that your discussion with the city attorney's office is really trying to get us to a path of how can we implement some component of this recommendation.
That's right. Yeah, and I really applaud your legal team for kind of walking through and trying to find I think we're always talking about trying to find the creases, and we're trying to find the creases of a way to put this in action within the constructs of what the state of North Carolina allows the city government to do. And so a couple things that I heard yesterday and walking through this analysis, and some of these could be more concrete, and other of these might leave our recommendation a little bit more vague. But the first is the county may have different authorities to make investments than the city does. And so it may be worth a recommendation from us to have a conversation with the county to assess the viability of their legal ability to do something similar to this with their share of property taxes, because they do operate at times within different legal boundaries than the city does. And so that is one idea. The second idea is there is more flexibility when the city makes investments in single family properties than it does in multifamily properties. And while the state or the city does not have a legal definition of what multifamily entails, the federal definition typically means 5 units or more. There may be loopholes within that. And the one idea I came through with that, which I think will be not a huge supply of housing, but an increasing supply of housing, is this whole idea of market rate hotel and motel conversions to residential housing. And so we've seen, I think, at least 3 projects in the last 12 months where developers have taken extended stay motels or hotel assets, converted them to market rate housing. And we could offer them a similar sort of property tax reimbursement incentive if they offered a fraction of their units to voucher or rental subsidy holders. If a hotel conversion to like an SRO designation, it does not fall in the camp of multifamily. And that is a very wonky legal analysis that I'm not equipped to do. So that's an idea, but I don't think it's a very good one or one that would yield a lot of units. If you stuck to single family in its truest form, I think we're challenged, because if single family means 4 units or less, obviously 5% of 4 isn't even 1. And so we're not probably going to get any sort of quotient of units that is going to make any sort of sense. And so really kind of exploring a couple different ideas. I think there's 2 pathways for us. And then
Hey, Mark,
it sounds like, yeah, go ahead.
before we move away from the single family notion, I just offer up that we have an increasing number of developers who are traditionally in the single family rental market who are becoming more aggressive about the build to rent model. And so I don't think that that's a lost cause completely. I think we should probably still leave it on the table and see how viable it might be.
I
Thank
agree.
you for mentioning.
I agree with Kim. I was trying to think that through that as well. So does the statute exempt then if you have, a home that may be a 3 or 4 bedroom that could have this opportunity and maybe a high opportunity area as a tax reimbursement? I think that's just a question, because then that could be a way of us, even though it'd be 1 by 1, wouldn't be maybe multifamily, but it would be on a single family basis in higher opportunity areas as an incentive.
I think it's worth thinking through that. I mean, I do.
I think that's probably where the analysis needs to go. I think, if the city if we're going to do a structure that looks like this recommendation in general form, the easiest way, or not the easiest way, but the only way in my interpretation of the legal opinions I heard yesterday, was to look hard at that definition of multifamily and see what's excluded. And whether that be a portfolio of single family rental homes, a build for rent townhouse model, a hotel
quad or a duplex.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What are the creases that where there's more authority, where they have less limitations on single family, where can we maximize that to our advantage? And I think one of the issues I can forecast for the lawyers is there is no city or state definition. From what I heard on multifamily versus single family, they use a federal definition and they apply it, but there's obviously new products and new uses that are kind of nascent in nature that fall in kind of a gray area. And so I think that's probably where that exercise would go.
Right. And I had do you have another idea at least?
Well, the other idea, and this is something that if you read the analysis from Anna Schlunis yesterday, there is a difference on how legal interprets a payment to a landlord versus a creation of a rental subsidy that goes to a nonprofit that could serve landlords. And if you think about this is essentially what the city has recently championed on NOAA's by creating rental subsidies kind of matched to property tax dollars that goes to a nonprofit that ultimately goes to a landlord. It is a good idea. and I absolutely support it. And my company uses that on NOAAs, and I think there are applications for new construction to achieve similar affordable housing goals by doing it. However, if the stated purpose of this group and this committee is only to ensure that folks with existing vouchers and rental subsidies can, one, find housing and increasingly find housing in better neighborhoods, it's not really the same thing, right? And so the city could technically fund new rental subsidies that might be tailored to new projects in high opportunity areas, but it couldn't do anything necessarily to enhance the ability of someone with a housing choice voucher or another existing rental subsidy form to live in a new project in a high opportunity area. And so there's a distinction. And so why I personally think it'd be wonderful I think as a part of our affordable housing ecosphere, we need to be talking in that language. I don't know if it fits within the purview of this committee.
So I have just a couple, I won't say I'm confused yet, but I might be heading there. So
You should be.
Okay, well, first of all, on this 20% thing, just going back to the legal memo, so if Livian were to project-based 20 project-based vouchers in a 100-unit market rate development, that would fully cover the market rate rent for those units. 100% market rate rent is paid. That would satisfy the 20%, because those would be dedicated to low-income families for the term of the contract. Are you saying, Mark, if that's the case, that no developer would want to do that, even though they wouldn't have to lower the rents in those units?
Yeah. I mean, my personal opinion is I think it's unlikely.
Okay. And then so the other question is on this alternative idea of financially partnering with a nonprofit. Isn't that the nonprofit that you contemplated in recommendation 2 to do like a master lease for 10 units or something? Wouldn't that work?
Will you say that one more time, Phil? I'm sorry.
If the nonprofit, you're talking about this alternative approach using a financially partnering with a nonprofit. What if that nonprofit were the nonprofit that you contemplated in recommendation 2? That is, signing a master lease, and then,
yeah, it's possible. Like I said, the city has much more autonomy to give money in the form of like a rental subsidy to a nonprofit, which essentially is like creating a subsidy directly to a resident, not paying the landlord.
Right.
The issue is in both the scenarios that you've described, all that we're accomplishing is making sure that the landlord collects the same rent they would have otherwise collected. What we had tried to do in recommendation 3 before we knew about this legal challenge was not only to make up for that, any economic deficit that might exist, but actually incentivize, make the economics better for a landlord. And so it was one thing to say, if in Livian's payment standard is $1,800 for a 2-bedroom and the landlord builds a property where the market rent is $2,000, not only was this property tax reimbursement going to cover that $200 a month gap on those 10 units, it should have been above a break even. So to get a landlord to do it and go through the paperwork and say it wasn't only, hey, make the same amount of money. It was, you might actually come out $10,000 or $15,000 ahead. So it's worth a little bit of the administrative work. And we can't accomplish that.
I don't know yet. Let's flesh that out just a little more. Because I was running down the same line of thinking that Phil was. So let's say a landlord has taxes of $10,000, and then so this tax reimbursement would be $2,500, and the city would then give that $2,500 to the entity of recommendation 2 to give that back to the landlord, housing provider in the form of a rental subsidy, right?
Mhm.
We would still be paying the market rate rent or close to market rate rent. Again, we're ultimately trying to get to paying exactly what their market rate rent is. So to me, I think that would still be, an add-on for them as far as bringing additional income, not just covering what the delta may have been in market rate rent and what the voucher was. It's actually a plus. But it would just have to be a rental. It would have to be a rental payment versus a tax reimbursement.
Hey, Mark.
It's a good point. It could be a supplemental rent that exceeded the rent the landlord was going to expect, and that feels like a bonus. Like if ethically you were willing to do that, like let's say HCV pays $1,800, the landlord needs $2,000, and we use this payment structure to a nonprofit to create a supplemental rent that was not $200 but $300. So it got the rent to $2,100. Like that backs into the same kind of, it's a better than break even economic scenario for a landlord to do it. And so if you didn't have an ethical quandary about overpaying the market rent to a landlord to take that unit, you could do that. The other way you could structure it, which might be a little bit, is you could take that money, give it to a nonprofit, and similar to like what Lotus Campaign does, you give people an initial payment to sign the lease. So instead of, if the rent's going to still be at the market $2,000, but you also get an extra $1,000 when you lease that unit. Something to that nature. That could still be enough of a carrot for a landlord to do this, and maybe gets funneled in a way where it gets around this legal obstacle of making direct payments to landlords.
Right, and you can still possibly be in that 5% range versus going to the 20, where we just don't feel like that is feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
So
Mark.
I think that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Fulton. Mark, I just
No,
want
go
to,
ahead.
I don't know what version, Mark, you sent to the committee, but I want to just point out what's on the screen is not the edited version of recommendation number 3. The edited version, I believe, Mark, and I know you guys have had a lot of conversation, it should say the city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County should consider offering property taxes. So I just want to point out that the county was included there.
That's right. Yeah, so what I did yesterday was I sent the recommendation that was emblematic of what we came to through our working session in November. My goal of sending that to the committee yesterday was not to think about the alternatives or what the direction that this could go, but was to talk about it and have this conversation, full transparency about what the options are and how we adjust it. And I think what we're coming down to is basically what that revised recommendation might look like. Because to me, the two ways to get this done is, one, you think about the discussion we just had over the last 5 minutes of, okay, let's take the direct payment to the landlord off the table. We can't do it. But if we think about this in the context of recommendation 2, where we're already equipping an existing nonprofit to help bridge the gap, could we think about a property tax reimbursement that goes to that nonprofit to add that bell and whistle to not only bridge the gap between what a landlord, market rate terms of a landlord, but also to create a financial incentive, a better than market outcome for a landlord. And whether that's slightly higher rent or a one-time $1,000 payment every time you sign a lease or something, it could happen that way. And then to your point, Pam, and the first kind of thing I came up with when this was coming with me is, it sounds like there's at least a discussion to be had with the county about whether their statutory limitations are the same as the city, or if there might be a pathway to get much more congruent to what our original recommendation was, but it just has to happen on their side of the fence. And so I think, what we might need to end up with, this is, the last committee meeting, and there's going to be work to be done after this to get to the final report. But I think at some point we have to give our committee needs to make a charge that this conversation needs to be had. And we need to try to find a way to accomplish something like this. And it may happen on the city side, it may happen on the county side, it may be directly congruent to what we thought we were going to do, or it may be something different, like this idea of working through a nonprofit to get back to a similar place. But at some point, I think the goal for me by 11:30 is that we try to find a way to shape a recommendation that gives ourselves a pathway to lead that conversation, and that we can try to get to results similar to what we had aspired to.
So where are we now? Sorry, this is not a lot of discussion, but I'm scratching my head like, okay, so where does that leave us?
Is it possible, folks in the government center, to try to pull up what that revised recommendation 3 looks like?
Mark, I think it is. Just give us just a few minutes to get that up.
So I think my goal, I mean, I think in simplest form, and I'm not good at being simple and I'm wordy, as you guys know, after the last 9 months, is something about initiating conversations with both the city and the county to explore property tax reimbursement structures that create financial incentives for new market rate projects to create set-asides of at least 5% of their units to voucher and rental subsidy holders. I mean, to me, that's kind of it in its most basic form.
Right.
And I think we know the permutations of that is we know the challenges on the city side, and we know it probably has to come in the form of some sort of rental subsidy or other payment through a nonprofit to get back to the same place. The idea on the county side is it may look like what we tried to do with the city, and it could work if they didn't have the same statutory limitations. But without being able to diagnose all that today, I think we just get back to this basic sentence that we need to initiate conversations on both fronts to try to achieve a framework that accomplishes something similar to what we aspired to do.
I'm in support of a more simplified recommendation that we know is going to have to go through a lot of gymnastics on the back end.
Yeah, and just asking the question, it prescribes here a minimum of 200 units. Is that a necessary limitation that we're putting on ourselves? Because it could be 100, could be 100 units, 150.
Yeah, I think one thing, Fulton, that I want to do by the time of the final report is try to get an idea of what the average market rate new construction multifamily project is. I mean, the one you read about in the Business Journal most often are always over 200 units because that's
Right.
how the economics out on most of the mid-rise. And so I don't even know if we're doing a lot of 100 and 150 unit market rate deals. I know we do a lot on the LIHTC side, but market rate just has different economic structures. If it's going to be 5%, we want it to be worth it. And so I think you do want to create a minimum that, 5% of 100 is 5 and 5% of 200 is 10. And so for the city or the county to stretch to do this, I think the juice has to be worth the squeeze. But I mean, if we learn that the average number of units being built in our community is 180, then 200 might not make sense.
What about existing? Because I mean, this shouldn't be limited to just new housing that's being built. This could be existing multifamily that's already on the ground.
So the pragmatist in me says that we need, there have been policies in the past that encouraged affordable housing and market rate developments that didn't work. Like people don't use them. And I also know that, and so I think like every recommendation, this needs to be a pilot that is studied and revisited and modified to make sure that it's working and achieving the outcomes and getting used. And I also think that there is a different message in terms of getting this done from a political perspective when we're talking about the utilization of new property taxes versus existing property taxes. And so the pragmatist in me, if this is a pilot and it's going to be revisited and we're going to measure success, is to get this done in a way where a new project's being built with property taxes that either government body has yet to receive. They can predetermine that they want to entertain this to achieve outcomes for affordable housing. And that's a way to get the conversation and the policy started. And then as a part of the revisiting in the next 12 to 24 months, that could be expanded or modified as it needs to best reflect the outcomes of this work and also everything that happens in affordable housing in Charlotte. And so that's why that exists. And I also think it's, like I said, because number 2 does so much to cover existing properties, moderate opportunity areas, and things of that nature. And we're doing a lot in number 2 to meet the market and provide some bells and whistles that are a little bit unique. To me, this is like the special, this is like the sprinkles that Stephanie was talking about on the sugar cookie. This is something extra to really get like the brand new project in the high opportunity area to really make a meaningful set aside in a context of something that would never happen. Like nobody who's building a 250 unit mid-rise structured parking deal in South End today is thinking about leasing to 30% AMI households. And this is a way to show that can be done. And I think that could lead to a lot of good things in the future. But I think I kind of like the idea of being intentional about this and really specific to try to get that conversation started.
I just want to make sure I know Stephanie Hand is on here. I think she's still on here. I don't want to miss any voices or feedback from other committee members. I know we're missing a few committee members today.
I have no additional feedback. Thank you.
Hey, Kim, this is Pam, and this may have been said already, and I know this may need a little more tweaking, but I just, and maybe I'm missing the math here, but in the bullets, it says it just needs a little editing. The reimbursement should total, I think that should be 20%, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, of the project's annual property taxes rather than 25.
25.
I think we were planning on 25.
Is it 25? Okay, that's fine. I guess what I was doing. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. One, I don't know if I'll be honest. I think I would rather this recommendation go simple.
Okay.
And I think the only tangible thing for the recommendation to include today is I think we all know, we don't all know. I agree with this, and I believe that Mr. Meacham agrees with this. I think there's a practical reality that 5% is the number. Like I just don't think this policy will get used if market rate developers can only do it if they have to do at least 10% of their project. I think 5 is right to make this project effective and actually get used by the marketplace. And so the only tangible thing that I would propose to put in an otherwise basic recommendation is that the city and the county should entertain property tax reimbursements to encourage developers on new projects at a certain minimum size to set aside at least 5% of their units for 15 years. I think 5% in 15 years would be the two kind of tangible things I would put in the recommendation. In terms of how much the property tax is reimbursed, I think we still need to run the math. And it's also, if it's the county, it's a different analysis than the city. If it's going to be a one-time incentive payment versus supplemental rent versus what we thought we were going to do, the economics are going to be different. So, I think practically, like, it should be around this range. I don't think there's a lot of viability for us asking for larger reimbursements, and it's probably not needed economically. But I think we don't know enough yet if we're going to kind of go back to square one on this recommendation to say anything other than 5% in 15 years.
Agreed. I love it. Love it, keeping it simple. So that's great. Thank you.
Are we saying then we're taking out the 25% of property taxes?
No,
I
that,
think-
no, that's not what I'm saying. I agree with Mark.
I am proposing that we take out 25%. Because if this recommendation is about talking to the city and the county, and we can't get it done with the city, then if it, the calculus is different on the county side because they get more of the taxes. And so 25% reimbursement from the city is not the same economically to a developer as 25% of the county. And so I think we might want to be careful about that.
So then, Mark, my
Mark, go.
response would be, you guys are the co-chair, you're the committee, so go with that.
What do you think, Fulton?
Yeah, I'm just thinking through it. Why not have the 25% there if it needs to be backed off based on the economics? We can always do that with the county.
I mean, if we're going to do that, then we might as well just say some undetermined amounts, since we have to do math anyways offline. But that we leave it there, whatever it ends up being, because we've said it might not end up being 25%, right? It might be some different number altogether.
Yeah.
What is seeming to be meaningful. I hate that Clay's not on here because I know that this was something that he was very passionate about.
Right.
And I certainly don't want to speak for him, but I'd love to get his feedback. And I'll just say for the record, so that Mark doesn't have to be the only one to say that, like, he doesn't think that more than 5% would be palatable for market rate. I will also say that.
Yeah, I mean, you want to know the math that got to the initial recommendation?
Right.
Is, let's assume that the delta between in a brand new project and a payment standard is $200. That's $2,400 a year. If it's a 200 unit project and it's 5%, it's 10 units. That's $24,000 a year in lost rent. A 200 unit project probably has a tax bill of $400,000. The city's about 160 of that. 25% of the city's 40,000. So you're getting a $16,000 surplus. And that's why the 25% of the city taxes on 10% of the units. And again, we need to fact check a little bit that we think the payment standard might be $200 short of brand new property, and it's going to be different all over the place. But as a general rule of thumb, it's kind of like why I thought the math was sound.
All right, just up to 25% cover it? Because it wouldn't be more than that with the county, would it?
The county would probably be less.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Up to.
Yeah. So I think I'm okay. I mean, I would say this. I'll put whatever we want on here because I think I like what we had. I would ask for a blessing from the committee to say, if we learn that the average apartment unit, a project getting built today is 150 units, we might want to change that minimum. If we learn that the best path on this is through the county or is through some way on the city side that we've never even discussed before, and this property tax needs to be 20 or 15% or whatever it is, like if we had the flexibility to do that, then I'm comfortable kind of saying that our benchmark was 25, saying that our benchmark was 200 units, saying that our benchmark was 5%, saying that our benchmark was 15 years, and then allow us to adjust based on the feedback we get through some of this legal analysis.
I agree. Cam, on the rest of the board.
No, I'm fine with that. Again, the devil's going to be in the details once we
Always.
operationalize it.
So I think,
but I think our intent is clear, right? I think our intent is clear, and just really appreciative of the gymnastics that you've had to go through to come up with this strategy. I think it's a good one. It's just about now how do we make it come true, right? And I think we got to talk to them, and as a part of this too, talking to the business community, developers, and property owners. Maybe they have something to say about it as well.
I think that's important. And again, I wish Clay was here and we could fact check a little bit of this, but I think it'll be important to it, the conversation as well. The other thing we talked about this is obviously the simpler the better. And while there's always gymnastics getting public funding, we know what our peers are able to do in home rule states when they apply for reimbursements to do affordable housing set-asides. We'll never be able to replicate that in a Dillon rule state. But gosh, we should strive to do as well as we can. I'm trying to make this clean and simple and understand and actionable, because what we're asking market rate developers to do is to, come out ahead a little bit, but also go through some administrative things that they've never had to go through before. And everyone's busy, and nobody likes things that are complicated. So I think that's an intention as well. The other thing I want to bring up before we kind of close out on recommendation 3, and I think what we might want to do is probably get a draft of how this gets distilled down to its basic form, and we'll circulate this to the committee after the call. But I do want to touch at least on the goal real quick, just to make sure we kind of have a basic precedent for that as we move forward. And so the goal listed here was to get at least 30 units in high opportunity areas over the first 18 months. And if you kind of go through the analysis I went through before, if we're saying these are 200 unit projects and 5% is 10, we're basically saying, can we get 3 developers to do this in the first 18 months? And to me, if you get 3 different projects to do this, then it kind of feels like something that's actionable. And we, again, like everything else, we have a right to revisit, or there should be a time to revisit the policy to kind of see what's working, what's not working, how might this be modified, and hopefully, perhaps how this might be expanded to try to create some initiatives across the affordable housing landscape in a similar vein.
I do want to just add, not to prolong this, I kind of feel like we probably should take a formal vote, but I also just want to say that for us, time is of the essence. We're in a unique situation. I think probably thanking to COVID. I don't want to thank COVID for much of anything, but the county is stepping up around affordable housing in a way that is really kind of unprecedented these last 2-3 years or so. And they have someone in place who's specifically looking at affordable housing initiatives. And so I think we have a great opportunity to bring the county into this and help us get over the finish line. I will say that for our committee members, I know this is a lot to digest and unpack right now publicly. This draft was done probably a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and then we know that the smarter people in the room, the attorneys, look at this and they make sure that we're not getting out ahead of ourselves and getting out ahead of statutes. And so wish we didn't have to unpack this now, but we definitely appreciate your patience with us as we do unpack it today.
And to echo that, I think it's important. Like, I think, every recommendation here is important, but this is innovative, and innovative usually means messy. And so I think it's important that we do this work, but I do think the precedent we could set in this community to get anything accomplished that looks like this, to have our brand new luxury apartments that are often criticized and lamented, to now start having 5% of their units leased to low-income families with rental subsidies or vouchers, I think sends a really strong message. And not to mention the fact of where these properties are being built are in areas of immense growth and opportunity, and in environments where, our typical voucher rental subsidy holder today is not experiencing. And so I agree that I wish this worked on its face. And trust me, yesterday was a different day than I thought it was going to be, trying to go through some of these gymnastics, but it's worth it if we can get anywhere close. And so I really appreciate everyone's time and effort to understand where we are and try to lead us out of it. So with that vote, or with that message, I think, Kim, the vote idea is a good one. And are we voting for us to be able to draft this recommendation in a basic form, similar to how I subscribe or prescribed, that we want to initiate conversations with the city and the county to offer property tax reimbursements for a 5% set aside for 15 years for voucher and subsidy holders.
I would actually ask that we do an up or down vote on all the recommendations, with the understanding that recommendation number 3 is going to have to be editorialized a little bit more. But if the committee is okay with the spirit of what recommendation number 3 is saying and the discussion that we've had, that we will do that once we're done. But that if the committee is okay with this, that we accept the recommendations with that last caveat.
Okay. You're much better at this than I am. Thank you.
I don't know about that.
I'd like to make the motion.
Sure, and I'll second it.
All right. It's been moved and properly seconded. I think the easiest way to say is, are there any opposed? I'm going to give it a couple of seconds just in case the opposition needs to find the unmute button. Okay, I don't hear any opposition, so those recommendations have been approved by this committee, accepted by this committee. And we will editorialize recommendation number 3 and make sure that we communicate the final version of recommendation number 3 to the committee post-meeting.
Great. Well, excellent work, everyone. I'm really excited about the recommendations that have come out. Think we've done the work that we set out to do to accomplish the goals of expanding access and increasingly having that access occur in areas of high opportunity. In terms of next steps, we are going to turn these recommendations into the central piece of a report, and that report will get conveyed to council. And Pam, if you don't mind, do we have a tentative date for when that council messaging may occur?
Mark, we do not. Council approved their schedule, I think it was last Monday. So we will get that teed up. What we said was kind of January, February-ish time frame. So that's the best answer I can give at this point. But we will certainly make sure that you and all the other committee members are aware of that well in advance.
Thank you. And so, that means the co-chairs need to work over the holidays. We have our work cut out to help us get to a final report that obviously we're going to keep the rest of the committee updated on as we work through the machinations and get to that messaging to council. The report is going to include not only these recommendations, but also background on what we've learned. If you have been in the Dropbox recently, you know that we've accumulated a lot of materials, both locally and across the country, about this issue. We've got a lot of testimonials. I think we spent a lot of our committee time on testimonials, and I think those were extremely relevant and instructive to the way that we see these things working. And I think if you all remember the walkthrough we did with Warren Wooten and his team on that interactive map, we have some tools from that map that can kind of inform some of the information that goes in this final report. Where housing trust fund supported projects are being built, where areas of high opportunities are, where market rate rents and conventional properties are in areas that might meet a payment standard, things of that nature. And so we're going to do our best to use some of those analyses to talk about how not only these recommendations get implemented, but also how we think that the landscape for housing choice voucher holders and rental subsidy holders manifests over time. And I said this at the beginning of the meeting, and I just want to pronounce it one more time. It's my belief, and via the vote that just happened, I think our belief that where we're rolling up our sleeves on the most today is on increasing opportunities in these high income areas, high opportunity areas. And that's why these 3 recommendations are so important. But we can't ignore in our report or our general analysis of this topic what the supply and demand factors are. And so that not only is that a little bit of synopsis of the market conditions, including those things affected by the pandemic, but also by all of the investments that both the city and the county have made in recent years to grow housing. And, the multiple of housing units with the public support in the last several years is vast, and is going to lead to the creation of a lot of units that will be ready, willing, and able to accept housing choice voucher and other rental subsidy providers. And I think thinking about the quantities of that as it relates to the success rate of folks finding housing is really important. But obviously, these recommendations go a long way and set a lot of goals for us to start to disproportionately move that 4,600 or so resident count of housing choice vouchers into areas of increasing opportunity. And so I think that's some of the narrative that you'll see as this report unfolds, and something that we're really excited to keep everyone apprised of.
Well, folks, I think Mark just gave us the next steps. So thank you, Mark. That was so eloquent. Looks like Jason is up for final remarks and to adjourn us. But before I do that, I know Councilmember Graham is with us, and just wanted to turn it to him if he had any other remarks that he wanted to provide.
Thank you, Kim. First, let me take this opportunity to thank the committee for the work that you've done for the past 6 or 7 months in helping the council steer this policy discussion in a manner that we can take some proactive action. So I want to thank Kim and Mark for co-chairing the group, and the balance of the members for their participation, those who are near and far, for really providing the type of brain power necessary for us to move this agenda item forward. So thank you for your community support, and thank you for the recommendations that you have outlined. I know that you guys are going to fine-tune it, certainly not during the holidays, but hopefully over the first of the year for a presentation. I would think first to the Great Neighborhoods Committee and then forward it to the City Council for final adoption, approval, or input. So thank you there. A couple of things before we also leave. I want to thank our housing director, Ms. Weidman. This is Pam's last committee meeting. As many of you know, she is turning a new leaf and taking yet another step forward, leaving the city of Charlotte. And I too want to again thank her for 30 years of public service, her commitment to affordable housing, and really, as I said on yesterday, just really being a really good friend to so many people in the building, and certainly to me. We welcome Rebecca, who will be joining the neighborhood servicing team, as well as Sean, who will continue the work and try to fill the shoes. Good luck. that Ms. Weidman certainly has laid forward, and I am confident, however, that we'll continue to do the work of serving the citizens of Charlotte. And so I just wanted to thank Pam publicly once again, and also thank Rebecca and welcome her to the team, and Sean and the management team for all they do for affordability of housing in the city of Charlotte. And so we look forward to getting the final recommendations, and then we will begin to circulate it with the council members. And I firmly believe that you don't ask individual citizens groups to spend months working on something and then do not take what they said seriously and moving it forward. So I make a commitment to you that I'll be a stalwart champion of the recommendations. I certainly 1 and 2 makes a lot of sense. Number 3 is going to need some, I think everyone used the word, some gymnastics along the way, but I think that's what we should do, really stretch the envelope, bend the rod, as far as we can to ensure that as the city grows, that everyone who wants to be a part of the growth, whether it's in East Charlotte, West Charlotte, North Charlotte, can find affordable housing and live where they want to live if they have the means, no matter what the source of income to live there. And that's what we're trying to do. So, Ms. Weidman, I will give you the last word as we kind of close out the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. I can say, Mr. Graham, it's been a privilege to work under your leadership as the chair of the Great Neighborhoods Committee. Can always and will always still count on you to be the voice of reason. And so really, really appreciate that. I too believe that we don't ask our colleagues, our friends to spend months working on something that we don't bring forward and that we don't take seriously. So I just want to commend this group. In my shop, we always say this is where the sausage is made. So I commend you all for making really, really great sausage. It's been lots of conversations, lots of learning. Can't say thank you enough for volunteering to do this work. I know you all have extremely, extremely busy day jobs. So again, so appreciate it. I think these are great recommendations. I think we spent a lot of time really getting to and understanding and learning what the heart of the issue is. So thank you so very much. And just to the team, to Sean and to Rebecca, thank you for stepping in and sitting in over the past few months as well. So thank you all, and just thank you for your support over the years.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, Councilmember Graham and Rebecca and Sean. And thank you, Jason, for being our facilitator for this experience. We've enjoyed being on this ride with you.
And thank you as well. And this brings us to the conclusion of our session today. And we do want to say thank you again. It's not enough words that we could say to thank you. But remember that there's no secret to success. It comes from hard work and learning from our mistakes. So let's continue to move forward and look at our mistakes not a challenge, but as a trampoline that will move us from where we are to where we ultimately want to get to. Take care and be well, and Merry Christmas to all.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.